I want to animate, and the thing that's been a real struggle are smear frames. Smear frames, as I understand them, are the motion blur of animation. But like everything in animation, even the motion blur is stylized. My problem is that, well, I'm not particularly stylish. When I do smear frames, they're boring and they aren't that good at showing the motion that I'm trying to convey. I'm using simple blurs, but if I do the smear in a single frame, it seems too violent, for lack of a better word, and spread over multiple frames, it just looks a bit off. Is it because I'm animating on doubles every 2 frames? What am I supposed to do? As I was pondering this question, a much-awaited episode of One Piece aired, and, well, let's try and learn something from it. And, you know, spoilers for some of the latest episodes of One Piece. If you haven't guessed already, I'm talking about the Gear 5 reveal. And to get an idea of what I'm talking about, I'm going to play this one short section animated beautifully by Vincent Chansard, frame by frame. Slow zoom in, first smear frame with a leg wiggle, bounce, smear smear, into an ease as Luffy bounces, regains his balance, bounces a few more times while squashing, stretching, and smearing his way into a final bounce into the sky. And here it is in real time. Immediately, I'm noticing that there are different types of smear, and I don't know the proper names for them, so I'll call them stretch, blur, multi, and solid. And you can see all 4 when Luffy spins his arms around here. I'll break down every frame. First, you see a blur, the outline disappears, the fingers stretch out in this great moment of perspective while the faraway hand blurs, though you can still see the fingers. Luffy's right hand then blurs as it zooms away from the camera, the left arm splits into a multi. I'm using the term multi because I'm a scrub who doesn't know the terms, but I'm using it here because you can see 2 distinct arms to show the smear. It continues with a blur and multi, 2 very stretched blurs, a single frame of solid as Luffy's upper body turns into a Beyblade, a couple of blurs, back to a distinct couple of arms with a bit of stretch on one hand, a few solid frames showing off some more neat perspective, back to blur, though this is the first time we see some blur where only the edge of the arm loses its outline, a stretch frame, a stretch blur frame, Luffy loses his detail but not his outline here, more blur, also I'm focusing on the arms but look at Luffy's head and neck here, a multi, a solid frame, but Luffy's lost his neck now. A couple of anticipation frames. I think the previous frame is also an anticipation frame. Luffy's head gets the stretch treatment as he jumps into the sky. That was like 2.5 seconds of animation. That's insane. But you know what I didn't see that whole scene? An opacity shift like what I've been using. And you know what? That makes sense. I'm going to make a massive unresearched statement, but from all the animation I've watched in the last decade, the vast majority of it is digitally animated, digitally colored, digitally composed. Gone are the days of manually layering animation cells on top of each other, and thank God for that, animation is so much more accessible now. Opacity is a tool that digital animators can use, but you know why I reckon they don't? It just doesn't look as good as the alternatives. I'll caveat that though. I've seen some smear frames where just the edges of the frame have a bit of blur on them, and that gives them a smidgen of an opacity change, but nothing like this whole smooth opacity change from transparent to solid nonsense that I've been doing. You know what's my favorite smear in this whole episode though? When Luffy slams Kaido down so hard his face literally leaves his body. It's magnificent. That section was animated by Jaki Swaki, and I'll actually take this moment to also thank Jay Kloom. I referenced his video in order to find who animated the different sections of the episode, and I'll link to that video in the description. Alright, it's one thing to notice a difference, it's another to try and learn from it. And the best way to learn? Putting it into practice. So let's take my arm raising animation that I'm making for my Chinese shorts and try to level it up, even just a smidgen. Now, I'm such a beginner animator that I don't know what types of smear is best, but let's try several variations. First, no smear, just the poses, then I'll walk through the 4, stretch, blur, multi, and solid. Let's start animating. Let's cut to a live blob it. Alrighty, live blob time. So, this is the hand raising animation. So we're going to start with just the keyframes. I've got my very basic, you can see here, got the easing, ease in, big movements, ease out, etc. And when you play it, let's make sure I haven't highlighted any frame here. You can see, doesn't look too bad, maybe a smidge slow. So this is what we're working with as a baseline. Now, I'm going to stop that. I've created the blur, multi, and solid in advance, and I'll create the stretch as the last one. So let's get to the blur. And there has been some learning since I started. So, with the blur, it looks all right, but it's kind of a case that it's a bit slow to need the blur, so it looks a bit weird. Just by the frame by frame, you can see there's a little bit of blur for the small movement, goes into the larger blur, then eases out. So this is directly inspired by the sort of blur in the Gear 5 reveal section. So what I decided to do, let's see if I can do it smoothly here. And now when you play it back here, when it's animated on 1s instead of 2s, well, technically it's a still frame anyway. That actually looks pretty good. And what I came to realize, and you'll see it with the next few animations as well. You can see I'm actually a little zoomed in, but that's because the Duolingo owl is supposed to be up there. You can see it's kind of, the faster it is, the more it makes sense to have a blur. So we move on now to the multi. And I realized after doing this, I just added 2 frames of multi, which when you do it, it does look kind of wacky. And I've added a tiny bit of blur around the edges because I don't have an outline like Luffy does, so I can't get rid of the outline. But now if you play the multi back, it also looks pretty good at half speed, and it looks, you'll have to take my word for it. Actually, you don't need to take my word for it. If I just do this, doesn't look too bad, but it does seem a bit slow. And when I move on to, I'm just going to undo that because I do like the half, the on 1s. Though I think I prefer the blur. And the solid one, you can see now, when it's just 1 frame, like this is the shortest hand raise between them all, and there's only 1 smear frame here. But it makes sense because, much like in the Gear 5 reveal, it's only, I am not able to control my own computer. The fastest movement is the solid one. And it makes me think, was the problem not that I was animating on 2s, but I've got too many frames in between where, for instance, if I just go for a test, let's hide this and go back to the original blur, which is this one. Too many frames. If I just remove, how does that look? And it's maybe a bit flashy. I'd probably change the position of that arm there and change the blur so it's maybe a bit higher up. But the point still stands that it's almost, I could maybe do it on 2s if I, instead of moving and pulling, maybe I just remove it this time. And you can see here, it kind of works on 2s. I just have to shorten the length of the actual animation itself. It doesn't need all the frames that the basic full arm swing needs because, you know, we've got smear frames in between. I guess now the last one, let's duplicate this whole thing. We'll call this one arm stretch. And now we're just going to do this one. I haven't really needed to change the bicep because you can kind of see it doesn't move all that much. Oh, goodness. Alright, I'm just going to fast forward while I do this. Alright, we've added those stretch frames, which are really more like solid frames, because I don't have the detail on this model, but we'll see. Yeah, once again, it looks a little funky when it's stretched out between so many frames. Like, not too bad. But if I were to... it looks pretty wacky. Okay. And now, with the removed frames, it should... It's kind of just like the solid one, except just maybe a little less. I think I prefer it to the solid one. The solid one is a bit... if we compare them... Yeah, there's like an extra frame, which kind of gives it a bit more of an ease. And actually, for my own confirmation, let's grab the solid. Would the opacity still work in this situation? It's not awful, but I think it looks better. Actually, maybe with a smear this big. Oh well. I've got to do more practice after this to try and get it just right, but yeah, now we got a basic idea. Right, that was a one-take live learning situation right there. And if it wasn't clear, because when I'm not scripted I tend to ramble, there was one significant learning that I was able to take away. The desired speed of the movement dictates which type of smear frame works best. That's why, when stretching the smear across the same number of frames as the no smear version, the animation looked a bit off. A bit too sticky, and yeah, switching the animation to run on 1's 24 frames per second instead of 2's 12 frames per second did fix the issue. But the better solution, especially to cut down on my workload, is to actually remove frames and adjust the smear frames as necessary. And yes, the opacity didn't look terrible when applied using the same principles of adjusting the number of frames to fit the speed of the movement. I just don't think it looked as good as the alternatives. But hey, that's just my opinion. Which of the smear frames do you think worked best? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you were able to take something away from me trying out various types of smear frames. And geez, massive respect to the various Gear 5 animators. The more I watch, the more I see that everything is either a squash and stretch or a smear frame. It's absolutely wild. Either way, thank you for joining me, and remember to practice too, because it's not I attempt new things, it's we attempt new things. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a fruitful day.